So yesterday was maybe the longest podcast we've ever done. Today might be the busiest. We've got 3 people on the sofa.
Fabulous.
Which is a great pleasure.
Well, it's ahead of the crunch budget, a defining moment for politics and the country.
Indeed, sink or swim. Huge pressure on Rachel Reeves ahead of Wednesday. So we have with us today people who can tell us what it's like to be preparing a budget, what's really going on with the economy, and we'll also try to untangle some of the politics. So shall we get going with today's newscast?
We must.
Hello, it's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And with us, an assembled cast of all sorts of different experts from different ideological sides of the divide. Jeremy Hunt, former Conservative Cabinet Minister of many jobs, including Chancellor. Andy Haldane, former Chief Economist of the Bank of England. And Sharon Graham, the leader of Unite, one of the biggest unions, who, of course, is a big voice in the Labour movement, but you're not necessarily this government's biggest fan.
So, Andy, you get to go first for reasons that no one can really understand. What is the overview of the UK economy from someone who used to be at the top of the Bank of England?
Mm-hmm. Very good, Paddy. Lovely to be here. Well, growth-wise this year, it's been a year of two halves. Actually, first half of the year, things looked okay. As best we can tell, growth picked up to about 1%. We found the government bragging about being top of the G7 league table. But the second half's been rather different. I think we've seen a loss of energy in the economy into the second half of the year. There's no one reason for that. Of course, Trump and tariffs have taken their toll. But I think the bigger cause of that, Paddy and Laura, has been homemade and has been the lingering, heavens how it's lingered, uncertainty about what will happen on the 26th of November. Where will the axe fall? And when people are uncertain, they press the pause button. We've seen businesses pressing the pause button on investment. We've seen households pressing the pause button on spending. And the consequence of that is the economy is ground to a halt, as best we can tell, in the second half of the year.
So that's extraordinary, though, when you set it out like that, and you called it the fiscal fandango, if you didn't hear it on the telly this morning, that this government's behaviour and their attitude to the budget and how they've prepared for it has actually itself put a damper on the economy. That is a real world effect that has slammed the brakes on the economy when 6 months ago it was actually growing not too badly.
Well, what's even stranger in a way, Laura, is that the same thing happened last year. So go back a year, 2024, the economy in the first half of the year did okay. It was growing all right, actually, partly off the back of optimism about change coming. And that gave way to a very soggy second half. Same as like Groundhog Day. And for some of the self-same reasons. In that the new government, when it came in, it led with what's to become of us. The first fiscal backhoe, remember that one? And that too sank confidence and optimism. I mean, the truth is that people's pay packets, not everyone, but on average are going up at a reasonable clip at the moment, once you adjust for inflation. So faced with that uncertainty, people have had more money in their pocket, but have chosen to save that rather than to put it to use and spend it in the shops.
Sharon, what is the feeling for you as a supporter of Labour, a backer of Labour in the past, at least? What's been the impact on you of the performance of the Chancellor and the Prime Minister?
Well, I think the problem they've got is that people voted for change. It was the big word that was across all the lecterns every time that they spoke. They came, as you say, and they said it's doom and gloom, it's doom and gloom. OK, you've laid that out. But they didn't put in the narrative and the story that is about how are they going to deal with this. So you ended up having a situation where it's all about everyone tightening their belts. And for those people that voted Labour, my members say this to me all the time, they thought when Labour came in, there would be no more that people have to pay, that it's working class people that have to pay. What they thought Labour would do is put a vision in for Britain, back industry, but actually say, look, if there are things to pay, then that should be paid out of the most wealthiest in our society. And one of the things that I am bemused about, and, I've said this, before, is that we've got a situation where Rachel Reeves just does not want to be seen to make the decision to tax wealth in the way that we're describing. If the richest 1% was taxed 1% more, that would be £25 billion into the Treasury. The black hole's supposed to be around 30 billion. Why is that a worse choice than picking the pocket of pensioners and hitting the disabled? So there's a real scratching of heads. Where's the industrial strategy that you promised? And why are we still paying? Why are working class people still paying the price for crisis that they did not make?
And it's difficult politically for Labour because they've not impressed people who are their natural supporters, and it's difficult for them for all sorts of reasons because of the economy, not least Jeremy Hunt, what they found when they walked through the door at number 10 and number 11. But I just wonder, I know that you actually speak to Rachel Reeves quite often. I think, she said very nicely that she sort of picks your brain every now and again for advice, even though if you're from different political traditions. But how bleak do you think this is for her?
Well, of course, it's very, very tough. And Chancellor's job is to take difficult decisions at big moments. And I think that I agree with Andy, actually. I think they wasted the first 6 months trying to anchor a political narrative that it was kind of all the Conservatives' fault. It was all about their inheritance. When actually the truth is she did have a tough inheritance, but the tough inheritance was because coming out of COVID and an energy shock, the economy was growing at a slow rate and our debt interest payments were very high, and that puts extreme pressure on public finances.
Like £1 in every 10, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. £1 in every 10 is paid by taxpayers, but in a way that Newscast listeners perhaps can relate to more. The average household is paying nearly £4,000 in tax every year just to pay for our debt interest costs. So we pay more as taxpayers to a lot of the time to foreigners who've lent us money than we pay for schools or the roads or the armed forces.
But here's one thing that we can pin on you. You basically wrote their manifesto. It's the most extraordinary political victory for the Tories at the time of their biggest loss that they got Labour to say they wouldn't raise income tax.
Well, I think this is where I thought you were going to say to me you couldn't afford those national insurance cuts, Jeremy Hunt. You shouldn't have done that or something.
Laura's
Laura's got that one lined up.
That's a better question.
Laura's going to... Okay, so let me preempt that by saying this, that those national insurance cuts were calculated by the Office for Budget Responsibility to increase GDP by nearly 1%. So what I would say is you can have an argument about whether tax cuts are the right thing or not, but that was part of our strategy to grow the economy. And if you're not going to do that, which I agree lots of people like Sharon would probably say you shouldn't do, but if you're not going to do that, then you have to have another strategy in its place. And I don't think we've had that.
But I do think what's important about that is that actually we could borrow to invest. And this is the bit that, on the one side, you've got, stay within your day-to-day spending, and that's the wealth tax conversation. Mm-hmm. On the other side, you've got industry after industry after industry in Britain where jobs are just going. Oil and gas industry, a whole steel industry, and they've got no plan to replace those jobs.
But how much debt is too much debt? Because what a lot of people think is now. The answer is now is too much debt.
Well, look, I think if you look back in history, in 1945, our debt to GDP was 270%.
But Sharon, yeah. Let's just take this aside for a moment. And, your members are on average paying about $4,000 a year in taxes. If we increase debt further, they're going to be paying more every year in tax Jeremy, just to pay for the debt interest bill.
Hang on a second. We haven't got growth at the moment. And what we're saying is that change the fiscal rules slightly, not so that to go on holiday. There's a big difference between borrowing money to go on holiday and borrowing money to put an extension on your house. When you put an extension on your house, it makes the house worth more, and it's a long-term investment.
I agree with that, but let me answer that though, because the point is that Rachel Reeves is borrowing. The majority of it is not actually to invest. I support borrowing more for new nuclear power stations or for HS2 or for roads. Yeah, we can. Let's have a violent. But about half of Rachel Reeves' additional borrowing, she's increased borrowing by about £28 billion a year, is actually going on day-to-day spending, which means that your members, means families on low incomes are having to pay more in tax for debt interest. That's the underlying reason, by the way, why taxes are going up this budget.
But that's why what we're saying, and we've been saying it for a while, is it's a two-prong approach. Fiscal Rule 1, day-to-day spend. If there is a black hole of 30 billion, why can't that come out of wealth taxes? You've got the richest 50 families in Britain are worth £500 billion. Right. And the second part of it can be borrow to invest, which you agree with.
Andy, this business of what you call debt is a good way to go. It's been proven in the past you can bolt new language onto difficult circumstances, and the markets will sometimes buy that. The Bank of England itself has got a fix waiting, has it not, about what rates, what it charges banks and what it calls it in the accounting books. Yes. There is some low-hanging fruit, isn't there? Don't all parties agree to change the name of some of the debt that's out there, or some of the rates that banks pay?
Well, I would be very cautious, Paddy, about going too far down that path.
Well, because you ran the system that called it that. So she's coming to change what you do.
Maybe so. Maybe I'm institutionally locked in. But look, when people talk at the moment about, we can find an extra 5, 10, 15, 20 billion just by paying the banks less on the deposits they hold at the Bank of England.
That's it.
You could do that. Of course you could. But let's just call that out for what it really is. It's a tax on the banking system. Why not just have a tax on the banks if you want to do that? And by the way, if you do that, don't pretend the banks themselves will pay it all. The lion's share will be paid by the customers of banks in lower deposit rates and in higher mortgage rates. In other words, us.
But you do agree the fiscal rule number 2 could be loosened, don't you?
I wouldn't call it loosened.
Okay, what would you
I would call it improved.
Well, that'll do for me.
And
you do it.
And that would mean...
And I've made the case on your show before now.
And you made the case over time.
Yeah.
Rachel Reeves listened to both of you, but just let's put it into layman's language. So if you loosen the rules, it basically means that Rachel Reeves would be able to borrow more if she spent it on particular things that might be good for the country in the long term.
Longer term.
Yes.
But this whole debate, I think this is really interesting because you guys have jumped right into the debate about the fundamentals here, about the size of the country's debt. And I think it's probably fair to say that hasn't necessarily been confronted and discussed by politicians of all stripes really in the last 12 months, because we quite understandably people focus on how much is going to go on schools and how much is going to go on hospitals. But Andy, just as an economist, if you're listening to this as a newscaster and thinking, okay, I don't necessarily maybe not that interested in economics. Right. Economics certainly wasn't my subject at school or university. Just can you explain to us as simply as you can, what is the UK's position when it comes to the debts that the country holds? And does that, and why does that make us vulnerable to the financial markets? Because we had Zach Polanski on the programme this morning and he essentially was saying, look, we can do things completely another way. He was quoting Andy Burnham a while ago saying, we shouldn't be in hock to the markets. So as a non-politician, can you explain this to us? Why does it matter and how much?
Well, it matters greatly because, as we've seen from episodes past, if you lose the faith of financial markets and they run away from you, if you disappear from you, then the costs are borne not just by government in how much more it costs to borrow, but by the whole economy. It shows up in mortgage rates, it shows up in company borrowing rates. What is the situation right now? It is without question fragile. There is an uncertainty about whether this government has the capacity to rein in current spending, not investment spending, but current spending. And currently it is threefer. The last budget, lots more current spending, and then a failure to drive through both winter fuel and welfare. It'll soon be a fourfer because two-child benefit cap is coming off and net, it's more public spending. So I think financial markets are looking on and saying, look, unless you're able to impose some discipline around this, the result inevitably will be further tax rises and a further crimping of growth. And that, I think, is their concern right now.
And that is the big choice that Rachel Reeves has. And I think this is really the central divide in British politics at the moment. There's people like me who very strongly agree with Andy Haldane that you look around the world and the countries that are growing fastest tend to be the ones with more competitive tax rates. And lower tax rates, let's call it for what it is. Yep. In Europe, we are stuck in the slow lane globally when it comes to growth. And the big risk that Rachel Reeves is taking is that her solution to the problem in national accounts, the national finances that we have, is to put up taxes. But that will inevitably cramp growth even more. And the risk is that this time next year, she has to come back with another horrible budget because growth is constrained and the markets are saying, well, if you're going to pay the debts, you're going to have to put up taxes more. And you end up in a kind of a doom loop. Now, no one is saying that you can cut taxes fast. But I would say that if you're looking for a long-term plan that would reassure the markets, it is that you have a government that has got a grip on public spending and has got a growth plan.
Right.
So I hope we hear both of those.
Under 14 years of Conservative rule, millions more people pay tax than before. So your fingerprints are on taxation. And we have said on this newscast, I can't blame you for not listening, that whoever won the election was going to put up taxes, including you. Okay,
Yes.
you had cut
and you were quite wrong. You were absolutely wrong to say that.
No.
Well, how could you say that about me? Because you don't know what I would do. I'll tell you what I would do.
Well, because you weren't going to move the thresholds, were you?
No. Well, first of all, let's just get a bit of BBC balance. Can I needle you a little bit into this? By the way, the tax threshold.
Steady on.
You said 14 years, Paddy.
We made you a cup of tea, for goodness
Thank you.
sake.
You've been so generous. I had a lovely BBC breakfast in the BBC canteen. I mean, what more could you hope for? But you said that more people paying tax. Actually, the tax threshold since 2010 went up from 5,500 to 12,500, and that is a lot fewer people paying tax. And Laura showed a great big chart on her screen in the show showing that actually wealthier people have been paying more tax relative to people on lower incomes. So, look, we had COVID, we had an energy shock, we had a global financial crisis, we had lots of different challenges. But you have to look forward. And looking forward, the big choice is, do you think the way to solve these problems is to hike up tax even more, or do you think you need to take some difficult decisions?
I do think, Jeremy,
to get them down
the big
again?
thing here that people are asking is who pays this time? Who pays this time? And actually, the biggest thing that happened in terms of our debt to GDP was actually the 2008 financial crash. We had a 35% debt to GDP before that. It went way up to 70. COVID was a lesser impact than the financial crash. And the people that paid for that were everyday people through austerity.
But the question now is that who is going to pay this time round, and
Yes.
who is going to pay when, frankly, the political bandwidth from Rachel Reeves is so limited. Because having given what, of course.
Can I just make the point that actually it's the same argument in France. So these are different political parties, but they're arguing over who should pay for the debt. So that's
Sharon makes the case very eloquently, but I would just simply say this, that the reality is the Chancellor's got two jobs. I mean, one of them, yes, is to make sure we have a fair tax system and that everyone pays fairly. I support a progressive tax system. But the other job is to raise money for public services like the NHS and schools. And if you have a tax regime that persuades millionaires who are not the most popular people in, broadcast shows like this, but persuades them to actually move abroad. And we've heard today that Lakshmi Mittal, one of the dwindling number of billionaires who lives in the UK, is moving abroad. Well, lots of people say, good riddance. I don't care. If you're rich and you don't want to pay tax here, then, off you go. But the truth is that is less money coming into Rachel Reeves, less money for doctors, nurses, teachers. And a responsible chancellor has to make sure that when you are in charge of one of the most international, globalized economies in the world, where wealth is very mobile, that you actually maximise the number of people who stay here and pay their taxes here.
Wealth tax, do you think there's a chance it's coming in?
No, I think what they will do is bring in something that is similar to it, but not the way that I'm talking about it. So I don't think it's going to come in. And I find it quite odd, particularly for a Labour government, where they're happy to make choices about winter fuel and taking that off pensioners. But when you talk about a wealth tax, it's almost like there's some allergic reaction to
it. Well, they did a U-turn because of the Labour MP, so they said they were going to do it.
Yes.
And Andy's point is they couldn't deliver it. So they said to the markets, we're going to tackle welfare. Then the Labour MP said, no, you're not. That's the bind she's in.
But the problem is because they have no narrative and story. I mean, if you literally said to me now, tell me what Labour stands for right here, right now, I would be hard pushed to tell you. And I'm interested, let alone anybody who's not interested.
But that's an
so the
extraordinary
story
thing
not being there is a problem.
But that's an extraordinary thing to say. I just want to hold on that for a second, because you are a very senior figure on the left of our politics. Unite and the Labour Party have had its disagreements over the years, but you're saying, as somebody with a lot of influence on the left of our politics and a lot of members, that you can't say what this government actually stands for.
And I think you'd be hard pushed to have anyone outside here if you stopped to say what it stood for. I mean, because the problem is they're doing a piecemeal approach. But if you had a scenario where you're saying, look, this is what we're trying to do right from the beginning, and every decision is based on this projection forward, then people would forgive them for some of the mistakes. But because nobody's really clear where we're going, and, just separately, but I will say it briefly, the industrial strategy piece, I'm the leader of a trade union, jobs is my work. The industrial strategy piece has been woeful. I mean, we don't have, they're talking to me in a meeting about, Sharon, we've got a wind farm in X, Ed Miliband says. Who made the turbines? Denmark. Where's our industry for making turbines? That's the borrow to invest. We have to begin to look at the industries for the future. Otherwise, there won't be the jobs.
And Andy, how much does having, frankly, a whole lot of political shenanigans make a difference to the ability to make the right economic choices? Because, the smart thing politically is not always the smart thing economically, and vice versa. So how important is this political instability that we've seen?
Oh, it's been very considerable so far in adding the noise to what is a difficult backdrop. But it's of even greater importance as we look ahead and the tough choices that are needed. I agree with Sharon strongly on industrial strategy. I mean, in the previous incarnation of industrial strategy, hard to say that word, I was the chair of the council of it. And that had a degree of go forward and indeed some money behind it. And this feels like words on a page. And much the same, regrettably, can be said of much of the growth plan insofar as one is discernible. I mean, a couple of points just picking up what Jeremy and Sharon were saying. Maybe these are inconvenient truths. The UK actually has a quite progressive tax system. The tax burden on the incomes of low and middle income workers is at its lowest level since the Second World War. And the tax burden on the top 10% is at its highest level since the Second World War. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't spread the pain. No, I get that. But the starting point is a quite progressive system to begin with, which is important context. Secondly, if it were me, and thank heavens it's not, there is a case right now in filling that gap, in having something like, to coin a phrase, one in, one out. So if you are to raise taxes on businesses and working people, what should accompany that is £1 also off public spending. So the burden is shared between government, households and businesses in reconciling what is inevitably a tricky budgetary reconciliation for Rachel.
I wanted just to say something slightly different. I very much agree with that last suggestion by Andy, but I want to do something very, very radical.
Go on then.
And just inject a little bit of optimism into this.
Go on, Jeremy.
Discussion.
Oh, well, we like that at the weekends. That's normally your thing, isn't it, Paddy?
I heard over the summer, I went to a conference and I heard a very distinguished American admiral say a wonderful saying. He said, "Hope is the first duty of command." And I think that Rachel Reeves needs to give us some hope on Wednesday. And I think there are some hopeful things. I mean, the fundamentals of the British economy, there are some brilliant things. We have outside the United States the most respected universities. We have the third biggest tech sector in the world after the United States and China. And this is the AI century. Sadly, because of Putin, a lot of money is being spent on defence, and we have an enormous defence industry. And, in a century of services, we are the world's second largest service exporter, including in financial services. There are lots of fundamentals that are actually very encouraging about the British economy. We've been through a miserable patch going right the way back to the global.
Are you the Labour Chancellor? I'm hearing this speak.
Hope needs to be credible. And the thing that I think has been missing is a concrete plan, a plan that actually shows us how we're going to unlock that opportunity. Because I want to say one more hopeful thing, and then you'll come back with a wall of negativity, no doubt, Paddy. But I will just say this: if my kids are young teenagers, and if I was going to choose a deck of cards to hold as a European country, genuinely, truthfully, I would choose Britain's cards, because I think we've got a lot of things, really fantastic things going for us. But, it needs more than words. People have got to see there's some concrete plans, and they've got to see difficult decisions being taken to deal with some of the challenges that Andy talks about.
And Rachel Reeves has revealed in one of the many interviews she's done in the run-up to the budget that she comes to you sometimes for advice. I don't know if there's a whole club of former chancellors, or you have a chancellor's WhatsApp group, but is that what you've been saying?
The misery club.
Join now.
But
Miserables of the world unite.
But a misery of chancellors.
Just on Jeremy's point, though, I must admit, so I share that optimism. And when I spent many, many years travelling the four corners of the UK chatting to businesses. We have amazing businesses. We have amazing sectors. We have amazing people. Too few of them in some parts of the UK. But, and it is a big but, we have failed to back them at scale, both investing in kit and in people themselves, in their skills. And that's what we need to unlock all that latent energy, which I agree absolutely exists. And I also say that in doing that, I think we need to give local leaders more control to unlock that potential. Too much is held and too much is made of this big national event called the budget. Much more needs to be done at the local level, where there's all the reasons to make.
So
I
reject the claim that I'm a pessimist. I think it's good rhetorically. I absolutely regularly on the weekend do look for the shining city on the hill. So I mean, it's a fascinating argument to have. One of the other things I love saying to Laura is that Liz Truss paid her gas bill. And it is the most extraordinary truth about whoever picks up the tab. During the COVID nightmare, the Conservatives launched the furlough scheme that had not been seen in our history. The Conservatives paid, in the energy shock, the Conservatives paid Laura Kuenssberg's gas bill.
Not just mine,
well,
can I say, because this is sounding a bit weird.
It's perfectly fair for Rachel Reeves to say, this is a very big bill, oh, members of the public. I have not got that much more money. But she can't seem to get past her own MPs, Sharon. That's the Labour MPs who seem to be running her, not the other way round.
But I do think it is about choices, though, and this is the point.
Yes, it is.
It's about choices.
They won't let her make them.
Well, maybe she's not making the right ones. I mean, the reality is we put a Labour government in, no disrespect, Jeremy, because we didn't want a Tory government in. We put a Labour government in to make Labour decisions, right? So I think what is frustrating people is that what we expected to happen is that those at the back of the queue were brought to the front, that workers were invested in, that those people that had paid for 14 years of austerity and COVID, that they were given an opportunity. And I do agree, actually, Jeremy, there's a huge amount of opportunity in Britain. I'm out every day with workers. What Labour are not doing, if you take the defence piece, they've gone through the hard graft of saying, right, we need to spend this on defence. Huge amount of money. Everyone goes, OK, no problem whatsoever. They have got contracts sitting on the table right now where they should be saying, yes, we're going to have 24 British Typhoons, and they won't sign them off. So, you've got the money. These are 26,000 jobs. The defence spend could be a huge part of beginning some of the growth back into the economy. They do the hard work and then they don't tip it over the edge. And that's a problem because they haven't got anyone looking at strategy.
So what the government would say is that the clear strategy we'll see this week are their focus on cutting the cost of living. And I think we're probably going to see something on energy bills. We're seeing freezing rail fares and also controlling spending. And Rachel Reeves will make the case that, look, here she is controlling spending. And we've discussed at length whether that is enough to control spending. That's all we had time for on today's episode of Newscast. But every single episode is on BBC Sounds if you feel like listening to more. Goodbye for now.